In 1880, a court in Chile went looking for witches and found kings, queens, doctors, commanders, and a hidden tribunal hiding in the rain. Ultimately, Chile didn't put witches on trial because it feared magic. It put them on trial because people were obeying them. I'm Arturo, and this is Latin Laura, where we explore Latin America's history, mysteries, true crime, and local legends, always whispering Latin intrigue. Subscribe for fresh revelations every week, perfect for your next campfire debate. On Chiloé, the rain does not fall like weather. It feels like a memory. It taps the roof, hides the road, swallows the shoreline, and keeps old names alive in the mouth. Somewhere in that wet archipelago, people said there was a book, not just any book. A secret book of power, guarded in Quicaví, was handed down from the time when a foreign magician challenged an island woman and lost. And from that book, they said, came a hidden court. That is the story people remember as the trial of the Witches of Chiloé. But be careful, the deeper question was not only whether witches existed, but also who had the right to explain death, who could point at a sick body and name the enemy, who could heal, accuse, punish, collect payment, and make a village afraid. Because in the court of Ancud, between 1879 and 1881, Chile thought it was judging witches, but the court found something worse than a witch. It found another jurisdiction. The name of this hidden order was Recta Provincia. The phrase sounds official, almost clean, like something stamped on government paper. The straight province, the proper province. But even the name is slippery. Recta can mean right, straight, upright, or correct, depending on how you hear it. That slipperiness matters because the whole story lives in that fog between law and legend, between the official world and the world people actually obey when the doctor is far away, the judge is late, and someone in the family has died for no clear reason. The legend begins with a ship. In testimony given in March of 1880, Mateo Coñuecar told the court that during the Spanish period, a Spaniard named Moraleda arrived at Payos and tried to impress the islanders with magical transformations. The people, seeing this stranger display his power, called for a woman from Quetalco named Chillpila. She was remembered as a powerful sorceress, and in the story, she did not kneel before the foreign magician. She defeated him. Moraleda, beaten, rewarded her with a book of witchcraft so she could teach the others. Now listen closely. We do not have to believe the scene happened exactly as told to understand why it mattered. A foreign man arrives with secret knowledge. An indigenous woman defeats him. The book passes into local hands. That is not just a spooky origin tale, that is a declaration. The island is saying the stranger came with power, but the power stayed here. That book returns again and again, like a dark little moon. Mateo said it still existed, protected by successive leaders of Recta Provincia in Quicaví. Local indigenous communities, he said, would not allow it to be taken elsewhere. Think about that image. The state had archives, legal codes, clerks, and stamps. Recta Provincia had a book, a place, guardians, and memory. Whether the book was real in the way a librarian would demand is almost less important than what the story made it do. It anchored authority to the island, and authority was the real danger. Chiloé was never just a pretty island at the bottom of the map. It was an archipelago, a watery labyrinth on the southern edge of Spanish power, with one large island, many smaller islands, dense forest, heavy rain, broken roads, and sea routes that mattered more than land. A person could disappear behind rain, trees, and tides. A rumor could cross a channel faster than an official order. To rule Chiloé from far away was one thing on paper, and another thing entirely in mud. The Spanish founded Castro in 1567, but founding a town is not the same as ruling a world. Beyond the plaza, beyond the church bells, Huilliche families lived scattered along coves and chapel districts, tied to older places and older memories. The Huilliche presence remained the deep bone of the islands. Spanish power arrived, yes, but it arrived unevenly. A governor could command in theory. A priest could preach in theory. But the archipelago had its own pace, its own silence, its own stubborn geography. Jesuit missionaries reached Chiloé in 1608, and by 1617, they had built a resident mission at Castro. From there, they created the famous circular mission, sailing from community to community, chapel to chapel, like priests stitching the islands into a rosary. But the bell did not ring alone. Mission came with labor, crown came with tribute, God came with paperwork. The indigenous people of Chiloé lived inside a colonial system where evangelization, exploitation, obedience, adaptation, and survival were tangled together. The abuses were not small. Encomienda and personal service pressed hard on indigenous bodies. Work, tribute, punishment, and humiliation became part of the daily landscape. In 1712, the Huilliche uprising erupted against colonial abuse. That rebellion did not appear from nowhere, like lightning over an empty sea. It came from years of pressure. Chiloé became Christian and colonial through both force and negotiation. People learned how to kneel, but also how to remember. They learned the language of petitions, offices, loyalty, and hidden refusal. By the late colonial period, indigenous communities were not simply isolated survivors outside history. They knew how authority worked. They had chapel districts, local leaders, tribute categories, royal service obligations, and a memory of the old indigenous corporate world under the monarchy. In the 1790s, indigenous petitioners from Chiloé asked bishops and kings for reforms, recognition, language instruction, fairer tribute, and proper officials. These were not people without political imagination. They understood paperwork, hierarchy, and sacred power. They knew that authority needs symbols. That is why Recta Provincia did not rise out of the fog like a ghost with no history. It rose from a world already trained in offices, territories, petitions, discipline, secrecy, and sacred explanation. When Chiloé was incorporated into the Republic of Chile in 1826, the flag changed, but deep habits did not disappear overnight. Santiago could draw new lines, but a rainforest does not move aside because a minister sharpens his pen. In Chiloé, old ways of healing, accusing, judging, and belonging survived in the cracks. Now come back to the courtroom in Ancud. The year is 1880. The Republic is young enough to still be proving itself, modern enough to speak the language of penal codes, medicine, and progress, but not powerful enough to make every islander trust its explanations. A death inquiry begins after the death of Andres Netor. What starts as a homicide investigation begins to pull threads. And the more the court pulls, the more it seems to uncover not one crime, not one healer, not one rumor, but an organization. Mateo Coñuecar told the court that he entered Recta Provincia through his dying brother, Andres Coñuecar, who held office inside it. Admission meant an oath, it meant secrecy, it meant obedience under threat of death. Mateo said he received the title of counselor. Notice the detail. This was not described as a loose crowd of old healers muttering in the rain. The testimony gives us initiation, titles, succession, kinship, and fear. It gives us a body with memory. And then the first sentence in 1881 drew the hidden order into an even sharper shape. The court described Recta Provincia as divided by territory with kings, queens, presidents, vice presidents, intendants, secretaries, commanders, repairers, and doctors. It sounds almost absurd at first, like a parody of government hiding in the forest. But that is exactly why it frightened the state. These were not only spooky titles, they were a rival language of administration. The Republic looked into the island and saw another courtroom staring back. Now notice what the judge did with the word belief. The court did not have to prove that magic worked like a knife or poison. It had to show that people acted as if it worked. Islanders came to these officers asking who had caused sickness and death. Families paid for answers. Accusations traveled. Punishments were requested. Fees were collected for notices, judgments, and services. Clients could become agents. Belief was not sitting quietly inside people's heads. Belief was moving money, fear, obedience, and revenge through the community. That made it social power. This is the heart of the case. Recta Provincia mattered because it gave misfortune a courtroom. A child sickens, a husband dies, a woman wastes away, a harvest fails. In an official world, maybe someone says infection, hunger, accident, or old age. But in the island world, another question arises. Who did this? Who sent the harm? Who broke reciprocity? Who envied too much, loved too secretly, hoarded too selfishly, crossed a boundary, stole affection, or refused to share when others were hungry? The record points toward ordinary village conflicts, provisions, prices, land boundaries, marriage, jealousy, sexuality, and honor. That is what makes the story so human. Not monsters flying over rooftops, not cauldrons for entertainment, food, land, spouses, reputation, debt, shame, the small wounds that become enormous in a place where everyone knows everyone, and every accusation has cousins. Recta Provincia gave those wounds a language. It told people where blame should go and sometimes where punishment should follow. This is why modern arrogance fails the story. It asks, how could people believe such things? But that question is too easy, too clean. People believed that because the official world had not earned the final word, doctors were scarce, roads were bad, courts were distant, priests came and went. A local healer with herbs, memory, charisma, and fear could be more immediate than a legal code in Santiago. When official medicine did not arrive, the curer did. When official justice moved slowly, rumor moved at night. The land keeps receipts. Medical power was central. Local healers did not only treat bodies, they interpreted the moral weather around the body. Some healed, some were accused of harming. Indigenous ideas about curers and harmful ritual specialists had long existed, but colonial Christianity poured demon language over them. Over generations, older spirits, Christian devils, fears of Iberian witchcraft, island medicine, and legal vocabulary all mixed together. Chiloé did not preserve a pure ancient religion untouched by history. Nothing human survives that clean. It preserved a frontier mixture, baptized and bruised, local and imported. That mixture appears everywhere in the story. A secret book, a cave or guarded place in Quicaví, kings and queens, doctors and commanders, oaths of silence, island healers, Christian evil, indigenous memory, legal titles worn outside the official court. This was not a simple superstition, nor a cartoon of savagery invented by outsiders. It was the result of centuries of translation under pressure. Chiloé took the vocabulary of monarchy, mission, medicine, and law, then bent it toward its own hidden uses. Every government is partly a ritual until enough people believe it. The court records are precious, but dangerous. We do not have a pure confession from the soul of Chiloé. We have a judicial archive. That means the questions shaped the answers. Clerks arranged the words. Judges translated island fears into crimes the state could understand. Later printed versions and copied files preserved the story. Still, they also carried the fingerprints of editors, officials, and educated men who already believed they were looking at ignorance. The archive is a mirror, yes, but a cracked mirror held by the state. So we have to walk carefully. When Mateo speaks, we hear Mateo, but we also hear the courtroom around him. When the judge describes offices and punishments, we learn something real, but we also see the state trying to make the strange legible. The file preserves conflict over meaning. It does not give us a magical camera pointed into a cave. That uncertainty does not weaken the story. It makes it stronger because the whole trial was about who had the power to name reality. The state could not simply punish witchcraft as witchcraft in a modern Republican court, so it translated. Magic became fraud. Curing became an unauthorized medical practice. Secret meetings became an illicit association. Suspicious deaths became possible poisoning. Belief became deception. Fear became a criminal organization. Now notice the move. The Republic did not defeat the hidden order by proving every spell false. It tried to defeat it by changing the language around the spell until the social world supporting it looked like crime. That is what the trial was really doing. It was not only asking, did someone poison Andres Nitor? It was asking, why are people going to this other authority when illness strikes? Why are they paying these people? Why are they afraid of their notices, judgments, and punishments? Why do these names, these titles, these territories carry weight? A state can ignore a superstition whispered in a kitchen. It cannot ignore a superstition that collects fees and commands obedience like a government. The defendants brought into this light were not just faceless villagers. Mateo Coñuecar appears as a key witness and accused figure, tied to the internal offices. Aurora Quinchen appears as the queen of the upper territory, a woman whose house was linked to meetings and whose curative payments were included in the accusations. Cristino Quinchen, Domingo Coñuecar, Juan Esteban Carimone, Juan Ignacio Uribe, Desiderio Quinchen, Jose Maria Chiguay, and Santiago Rein also appear in the broader web of charges, suspicions, offices, and testimony. Aurora matters. The court named her not as a background assistant, not as a whisper, but as a queen. And before her, in the origin story, Chillpila defeats the foreign magician. Women in this record are not only victims, saints, or temptresses. They hold memory. They hold houses where meetings happen. They hold dangerous authority. The island imagination does not make power wear only a man's face. In Chiloé, the secret book passes first through the victory of a woman. The lower court tried to make the hidden order visible and punishable. In March of 1881, Judge Beitia convicted several defendants. Mateo received 3 years in prison. Aurora and Cristino Quinchen received 541 days. Others received 1 year, or the time already served. But even in conviction, the court struggled. The most serious accusations of homicide by poison could not be made solid enough. You can imprison people for association. You can name fraud. But how do you prove that fear killed when fear leaves no wound shaped like a blade? Then came the turn. On May 24th, 1881, the Court of Appeals of Concepcion undid the lower court's work. The defendants were acquitted. The higher court held that the association had not been proven to exist for criminal ends. The poisoning deaths lacked the necessary material proof. The small payments made by Aurora and others could be read as payment for curative services rather than as proof of fraud. At most, some minor offense had already expired. Just like that, the legal monster dissolved in daylight. But do not mistake the acquittal for tenderness. The Republic did not suddenly bow respectfully before the island authority. The appeal court denied Recta Provincia's criminal reality, but the prosecution had already done its work. It dragged names into the open. It taught the public to hear words like fraud, poison, deception, and ignorance where others had heard healing, warning, and judgment. If Recta Provincia was dismantled around this moment, it was not erased from memory. Its public legitimacy was damaged, but the rain kept the names. That is a more precise kind of defeat, not a clean destruction, not a bonfire where the past vanishes. More like a government seal pressed over a living wound. The hidden tribunal could survive in story, in fear, in folklore, in whispers around Quicaví, but before the Republic, it could be stripped of official dignity. Sometimes power does not need to hang a person. Sometimes power only needs to rename them. The prosecutor's language shows the blade. He described a secret association, mostly indigenous, governed by unknown laws, using death as punishment, keeping curers who charged for healing, and making the ignorant believe in transformations and harmful powers. He called for strict surveillance of the indigenous people, especially local healers and ritual specialists, so such crimes and deceptions would disappear. Hear what hides beneath that language. This was public safety, yes, but it was also a racial, medical, and political discipline. The Republic was saying, your healers must answer to us. Your accusations must pass through us. Your punishments must be ours, or they are a crime. Your explanations of sickness must bow before our doctors. Your offices must dissolve before our offices. Your hidden book must not compete with our codes. That is the real terror inside the trial. Not that people believed in witches, but that belief made another order believable. This does not mean Recta Provincia was harmless. We should not romanticize it into a perfect indigenous resistance court filled only with wisdom and protection. The record carries fear, threats, payments, coercion, and accusations of poisoning, even where the higher court found proof lacking. Local power can defend a community, and local power can terrify one. A hidden tribunal may answer needs the state neglects, but it can also turn rumor into punishment. Respecting the people of Chiloé does not require pretending every shadow was gentle, but we also cannot let the old courtroom teach us contempt. When officials called islanders ignorant, they erased the conditions that made other authorities necessary: distance, poverty, rain, bad roads, scarce doctors, a colonial inheritance of tribute and discipline, a republic that wanted obedience before it had offered trust. In that world, belief was not stupidity. It was infrastructure. It was how people made sense of suffering when the official answers arrived too late, too expensive, or not at all. Chiloé was not alone. Across colonial Latin America, courts kept meeting the same figures under different skies: caves, healers, serpents, rumors, poisons, frightened families, and officials trying to translate local fear into legal language. In Concepcion, in the 1690s, indigenous defendants were accused of sorcery on a frontier where interpreters stood between worlds. In Chilean, in the 1740s, cave meetings and serpent imagery appeared again. In Talca, in 1765, a man named Domingo Rojas was pursued after a public rumor accused him of being a sorcerer. Farther away, in Chiapas, another court listened to accusations of sorcerers, witches, shapeshifters, and keepers of forbidden practices. Different people, different landscapes, different courts. But the pattern repeats. Authorities did not need to believe every magical claim to act. They only needed to see that belief was producing disorder outside their control. A rumor repeated by enough mouths became a social fact. A healer feared by enough neighbors became a danger. A cave imagined by enough people became political geography. The question was rarely only, did the spell work? The colder question was, why are people obeying this world instead of ours? That is why Recta Provincia stands out. It was not just one accused healer, not just one frightened village, not just one quarrel dressed in magic. It appeared in the records as a territorial, hierarchical, corporate body. Some remembered it as the majority, some, such as the Tribunal of the Indigenous Race. Some scholars reconstruct its political imagination as something like the Republic of the Race. Those names matter because they drag the story out of carnival horror and back into history. People who had lived under old colonial categories, who knew tribute, chapel districts, indigenous petitions, royal service, and corporate identity, could imagine authority in forms that sounded official, but did not belong to Chile. Recta Provincia was not a modern nation hiding in a cave. It was not a parliament in the forest, but it carried the grammar of jurisdiction. It had offices, it had territory, it had procedures, it had fees, it had punishments. It had a book, and jurisdiction is the sacred word beneath the mud. Who may judge? Who may heal? Who may accuse? Who may say this death was natural and that death was sent? Who decides whether a neighbor's prosperity is innocent or whether envy has taken shape? Who settles the boundary when the paper is far away and the fence is right there under the same rain? The state says me, the church says me, the doctor says me. The family says us. Recta Provincia answered from the wet interior of the island. That answer was not always kind, but it was recognizable, and recognition is the beginning of power. The secret book in Quicaví becomes the perfect symbol because every authority needs an object that makes it feel permanent. The church has the Bible, the republic has the code, the court has the file, the notary has the signature. Recta Provincia had the alleged book of Moraleda, guarded by chiefs, tied to a place, defended from removal. Whether we imagine it as a real manuscript, a remembered object, or a legend that carried political meaning, it tells us what the island wanted to say. Knowledge lives here too. No wonder the state wanted that kind of belief reduced to fraud. Fraud is smaller than sovereignty. Deception is smaller than jurisdiction. Superstition is smaller than political memory. Once the Republic renamed the hidden order, it made it easier to dismiss. The witches became criminals or fools. The healers became unauthorized practitioners. The court became a criminal association. The book became evidence of ignorance, not a symbol of local authority. But the archive betrayed the state in one beautiful way. To prosecute Recta Provincia, the court had to preserve it. Every question wrote another fragment into history. Every accusation recorded another title. Every attempt to expose deception saved the names of Mateo, Aurora, Chillpila, Quicaví, Moraleda, the book, the kings, the queens, the doctors, the commanders. The state tried to discipline the island and accidentally gave it a second life on paper. That is why the story still breathes. People love the strange parts, of course, the transformations, the cave, the book, the secret meetings. The punishments are sent through darkness. Those images belong to the night language of Chiloé. They are cinematic, wet, and unforgettable. But the grounded truth is even stronger than the supernatural version. A widow wants an answer. A family fears poison. A healer charges for a cure. A neighbor is accused of taking the land. A woman is called the queen. A judge tries to turn belief into law. This is also why cheap conspiracy theories fail the story. They ask whether the witches were secretly all-powerful, whether the book contained impossible knowledge, and whether a hidden cult controlled the island from caves. Those versions may get clicks, but they steal intelligence from the people who lived this history. They turn social strategy into spectacle. They make Chiloé exotic instead of human. The truth is already haunting enough. People built meaning where official institutions were weak, and the state moved against that meaning when it began to look like authority. There is a lesson here for every frontier, every forgotten town, every place where the official world arrives late and then acts surprised that people made their own systems. Human beings do not wait politely for institutions. They improvise, they remember, they borrow symbols from conquerors and bend them into local tools. They heal with what grows nearby. They judge by what the village believes. They punish through the language available to them. Sometimes that language protects, sometimes it wounds, but it is never empty. So when we ask whether Chile put witches on trial, the answer comes back covered in rain. Yes, the popular memory says witches stood before the court. Yes, the file is full of sorcery, cures, poisons, oaths, and secret offices. But beneath that, the Republic was confronting a belief that had become infrastructure, the belief that explains illness, belief that named enemies, belief that collected payment, belief that appointed queens, the belief that guarded a book, a belief that made another jurisdiction feel real. And that is more dangerous than a spell, because a spell can be mocked by a judge. A jurisdiction competes with him. The final twist is that nobody fully owns the ending. The appeal court acquitted the accused. The state did not prove its strongest claims. Recta Provincia was publicly wounded, likely dismantled as an organized force, but not erased from memory. The Book of Quicaví kept returning in legend. The Witches of Chiloé became folklore, history, accusation, and warning all at once. The official court closed its file. The island did not close its mouth. So picture the rain again. It falls on Ancud, on Castro, on Quicaví, on the old chapel paths, on the beaches where boats once carried priests, officials, healers, and rumors. Somewhere inside that rain is the question the trial never fully answered. What makes authority real? Is it the law written in Santiago, the doctor's certificate, the priest's sermon, the judge's sentence? Or is it the thing people actually obey when fear enters the house? The court could acquit, the state could be renamed, the archive could be preserved, but the story remains unsettling because it refuses to become only one thing. It is not just witchcraft, not just fraud, not just resistance, not just medicine, not just crime. It is a struggle over reality itself, fought on an island where geography protected memory and memory learned how to wear official clothes. That is why Recta Provincia still feels alive enough to disturb us. At the beginning, we followed a rumor about a secret book. By the end, the book has become something larger. It is not only a book of spells, it is the question every archive asks. Who gets to write the truth others must live under? The Republic had its answer, the island had another, and somewhere between them, in the rain, the Witches of Chiloé became immortal. Thank you for trekking the hidden trails of Latin America with me. If tonight's story unsettled you, subscribe and ring the bell, because Latin America's most intriguing stories are far from over.